Hi, this is Karen Roy, and we're doing another episode of Life Possible with a Disability. I'm here with my friend today, Ali Ingersoll, who I met through, we both advocate together on with the Item Coalition, and we are fighting for, excuse me, we're fighting for standing and seat elevation in power chairs. So that was kind of my first kind of introduction to her. And I think we have a few mutual friends that started telling me about her the same week. And a lot of her uh, efforts have been around trying to get coverage for items that wheelchair users need. And she has a really interesting story about how she sort of got involved with that and how she wins. And how she not only wins for herself, but she teaches other people how to advocate for themselves in the process of trying to get your own complex rehab in your own wheelchair. So Ali, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your injury, and then your story.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So happy to be here. We definitely got introduced. It's a small world in the disability advocacy world, so everyone gets to know each other very quickly.
Yeah.
So yes, I was injured in a shallow water diving accident in 2010. A C6 quadriplegic in the Bahamas, where I was living. I kind of had a wild upbringing. I kind of grew up all over the world with European parents, traveling the world, getting involved in adventure travel programs, living in China internationally on my own, kind of like really wacky. So I've always had kind of an adventurous spirit. So I suppose breaking my neck was probably no different. But at 27, when I was in the Bahamas, I was learning to become a day trader. And I was working in politics prior to that. And once I completed a kind of a self-study course over the course of a year, I was celebrating with some friends, a little tiki bar in the Bahamas. I had not been drinking yet. I was still sober, but I was a little cocky being an island girl. And I took a shallow water dive and I hit my head, and it took me 22 hours to get over to the United States. So when I woke up at that time, the doctor said, I have some pretty bad news for you. You're a C6 quadriplegic. And I said, no kidding, you think?
Wow.
Because I was pretty intimately familiar with medical survival. So I was awake and conscious the whole time for the 22 hours. So I was intimately familiar with what happened.
Wow.
Yeah. And I spent the first 5 to 6 years in Miami, and then moving over to China. I was one of the unlucky quadriplegics who had about 5 or 6 years of just complete medical disasters, from pulmonary embolisms, osteoporosis, cervical cancer, spinal cysts. I moved over to China for spinal surgery and a rehab program. Fortunately, I do speak the language, so that was very fortunate.
Wow, Ali.
Yeah, so I wasn't really involved in advocacy for the first 5 or 6 years. And I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina in 2015, and I started to build a life, and I started dating, which I'm sure we will get into. I have a lot of crazy dating experiments about how I met my husband.
Yeah, I'm so excited about that because
I know.
Yeah, because I've read her blogs. She has, and I'll attach all of her information in the show notes. But I love her story, and I didn't want to do 2 sex podcasts in my first 10 episodes, so we'll push it down the road. But I'm looking forward to it.
Put a bookmark in that one.
Yeah.
So, but throughout this time when I was in Raleigh, I spent a year in bed from a major stage 4 pressure sore that was on my tailbone. And during that time, I created a schedule for myself where I started to finally get on Facebook. I was a little late bloomer, and joining a lot of these spinal cord rehab, injury support groups on Facebook. And I was studying and reading every day because, one can dive into a deep depression when you're looking at 4 walls for an entire year.
Yeah.
And so for my dating experiments and my year in bed, I started my advocacy in a very roundabout way on sexuality and disability, which is how my website, The Quirky Quad, came about. And after I was up and about from the surgery, I started fighting, getting denied for medically necessary equipment from insurance companies. And it really just ticked me off tremendously. And I trusted my doctors, which I'm not saying all doctors are bad, but there's an expression I grew up with: trust but verify.
Yes, that's great.
And my doctors would write me 3-sentence letters of medical necessity stating, this woman has a diagnosis code of so-and-so with quadriplegia. This piece of equipment is medically necessary. And that was it. And it was disturbing. So I decided to make it initially, from an advocacy perspective, the first part of my life's mission to learn how to write professional letters of medical necessity, backed up by peer-reviewed journal articles. And
Mm-hmm.
then I would just find the right doctors who were smart but not too smart, so
Yeah.
they could just sign my letters of medical necessity as I needed them. And I have a great physical therapist, a spinal cord injury one, so she understood what needed to be written. And then I really took control of the whole process. I didn't let my durable medical supplier at first. I didn't let my physical therapist or doctor send any of the paperwork. I
Mm-hmm.
found with insurance, you have the right to a kind of a care specialist, care management specialist, or somebody to help you advocate. That's usually a nurse, but
Mm-hmm.
you can submit all your own paperwork for insurance. It's not easy. It's tedious. It's a little backbreaking, but that way you have negative control with crossing your T's and dotting your I's, so all your information is correct.
All
So
right.
after I still got denied, but I started to teach myself the appeals process, specifically like the private insurance appeals process,
Mm-hmm.
and then started to take it national, working with United Spinal and Christopher Reeve Foundation and a whole host of other national organizations on how to become your own self-advocate, right? So you
Yeah.
have to be your own self-advocate. Medical care, caregiving, I mean, anything, your job, your life, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I started this journey and now work with dozens of people. But I tell them, I'm like, listen, I can help you. I can guide you. I have standard letters. I'm working with Spinalpedia right now with Josh Basil on getting a patient-to-patient guide up for navigating the appeal system. So
Wow.
all the information is there, but you have to be able. I can't write it for you. I can't
Right.
do it for you. I can give you the template.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how my health insurance advocacy career started, and then it kind of blossomed into I have a multi-pronged approach to a lot of things I'm doing, trying to dive into the corporate world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and going in a lot of different directions at the moment. But that is on the health insurance part.
Yeah, because I know that I'm a social worker by background, so part of my job was helping other patients of ours that came into the hospital acquire their CRT. Sometimes it was appealing their length of stay because they were trying to get them out of the hospital as soon as
Oh,
possible.
they did that to me as well.
Yeah,
It's horrible. They try to kick you out after 30 days.
yeah, yeah, and send you to a skilled facility, which is really inside of a nursing home. So that's therapy inside of a nursing home. And most of the time, those are not neuro specialists, the therapists.
No.
They're doing like range of motion and kind of the bare minimum. And they're probably not familiar with neurogenic bladder, neurogenic bowel, autonomic dysreflexia, or all anything that if you are treating someone with a fairly new injury or diagnosis that affects the spinal cord, they should 100% be experts in.
But it's funny you say that autonomic dysreflexia. So most people, even when I go to the ER, they don't even know what that means. So
Yeah.
I kind of dumb it down for them. I said, okay, your autonomic nervous system, think automatic. You controls your blood pressure, your sweating, your heart rate, things you don't think about. So I tell nurses this. I said, when I feel pain as a quadriplegic, if you stab me in the leg, I'm not going to go, ow. My blood pressure is going to spike, which can
Yeah.
cause a stroke, and I can have sweating or goosebumps. That's the way I show pain. And this
Mm-hmm.
little light bulb goes off in their head. They're like, oh, I'm like, right. So, there you go. There's autonomic dysreflexia. Let's get to know that term very well.
Yeah. It is funny that you learn, if you're lucky, you go to a good rehab and you learn all these things. And let's say you're not lucky, but you are,
Curious.
you're curious, right? You're a good researcher. You're willing to put in the homework to kind of learn your body. You become a teacher for the rest of your life,
Oh,
teaching the
absolutely.
people that care for you. I remember my very first visit to the emergency room after I got shot. I'd been home. I was lucky. I had a 5-week rehab. I'm paraplegic, so I was like, they taught me how to put my socks on. I was strengthening upper body, how to use reachers and grabbers to cook, how to drive with hand controls, all that. I like boom, 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 knocked it out, went home. Um, I used functional electrical stem and I get a little overzealous with my working out. I pulled a muscle in my leg, which the medical community here that doesn't know anything about spinal cord injury, like, how can a paralyzed person pull a muscle? Well, you
Yeah.
can. I mean, if they'd have listened to anything in the intake, I will tell them I had just ridden my bike and then my right leg calf swole up, fever, and my CPK enzyme was really high, which means that's an indicator of muscle damage. You have to flush the kidneys then because it can cause kidney damage. So they're IV fluids to keep my kidneys flush. They are like looking for all these crazy things like phlebitis and cellulitis. And I remember thinking to myself, they literally have no idea what they're doing. And I was only probably 20 because I got shot when I was 19. This was within a year. And I remember calling my doctor from rehab and I'm like, these morons don't have a clue what they're doing.
They don't.
He's like, you pull the muscle, you need a Medrol dose pack, you need a steroid to reduce the inflammation. And I basically told the doctor, I was like, I need a Medrol dose pack. I told you I
You
pulled
have
it.
to tell them what you need. I mean,
Yeah.
unfortunately, you have to handhold them. But sadly, a lot of people with disabilities and in wheelchairs have so much going on. They don't know how to research. They don't know what questions to ask, and they trust their doctors
Yeah.
blindly, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
that's why we need to create this awareness and education campaign on every aspect.
Yeah. So there's the medical aspect. And then, I work for New Motion. This is a New Motion sponsored podcast. And a lot of times, I think people put it in the hands of their doctors and their suppliers and their therapists to just handle everything. And that is our job. And we do forward the paperwork. We gather the paperwork. We call. If we don't have what we need, we're calling the doctor's offices. We're faxing the doctor's offices or the therapist, to sign off on the 16-page evaluation that was done for your wheelchair. The paperwork is enormous. And due to past fraudulent activity by places like the scooter store, like in 2007, people went to federal prison for basically lining up people that did not need complex rehab and giving them all scooters and wheelchairs and profiting from it. Doctors just loading people up in buses. So as a result of that fraud, the overcorrection, I believe, by Medicare was to make it almost impossible for people with actual disabilities to get what they need in a timely manner.
Yes.
So, but it is very helpful. And I've always said, if we've called a couple times to try to get your physician to sign the 7-element or, to date it correctly or to fix something that they didn't do properly, it may not be responded to as quickly as if the customer themselves or the wheelchair user themselves calls and says, look, if you don't get me this piece of paper signed and this is why, then I don't get the equipment that I need. And I'm in danger of getting a wound.
Yeah. I have to call my doctor sometimes 10 to 12 times because they're busy and they have other patients. Yeah. I mean, their companies, and we need systemic change in healthcare. However, we need to learn how to navigate within the broken system. But part of that requires being a little tenacious and determined on the patient side to constantly call and follow up. I was just on a call yesterday with a young woman who needs help. And she needs a new manual chair because her level of function is deteriorating and she's been denied. I said, well, have you seen the paperwork? Well, no. Can you get me the paperwork? Can I at least read it and then I can help you?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, where do I go to get that? So I run into this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes forget, just being a big advocate, that even these little simple questions are very challenging for a lot of people, not in a negative way. It's just they don't even know where to start. So, they need somebody to talk to, people, in their own community who know how to navigate it.
Yeah. And because there's a patient's bill of rights. I mean, we have rights to this information and we have rights, like you said, to file our own paperwork if we choose to. And I guess we're fortunate in the way I always say this, like, it really depends on a lot of your background. And, my parents were fighters, and so I come from a long line of people that don't just take no and walk away or continue to blame other people, but to take the bull by the horns and figure it out. And I think, it's a learning curve, maybe depending on what a person's background is. And I happened to work I was shot and paralyzed while I was in college, and that probably pushed me towards social work and then towards rehab, right? That I became an expert at the process, not just for myself, but for other people. Other people don't have the, maybe the background for it.
No, and one thing too, you need to appreciate that we still, even though the system's broken, we have a system, and it's not perfect. But I was giving a talk to the International Rotary Club the other week, and there are people from all over the world with disabilities and in wheelchairs. And there's a young man in South Africa, and he goes, I explained to him, I said, it's challenging. I know it looks from the surface that we have this amazing healthcare system in the US. And in general, compared to many others, we do. However, take this as an example. People on Medicare or Medicaid, they're told how many catheters they can get a month or a week and how many times they can go pee. And I gave a series of examples like this. And he said, seriously? Because all of us internationally think that you guys live in the land of milk and honey with health insurance. So thank you for shedding light on that. And it
Wow.
was really eye-opening to see the different systems globally. So, while we definitely need change, it's also to appreciate that we have the right to even talk about this and not go to
Yeah.
jail for free speech, right?
Right. Wow. Yeah. And like I said, because when you look at some of the equipment that comes out of Europe, I mean, and there's pros and cons to this. Socialized medicine has its pros and cons.
Everything does.
Yeah. So the pros are that they get some pretty stellar equipment in
Yes.
Europe. And like the Tech RMD was developed in Turkey. Soft wheels were developed in Israel. And they have the money to innovate in a way that sometimes we don't here.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We have a lot more red tape here as well and getting medical codes. I mean, a lot of adaptive exercise equipment, which is medically necessary for many of us, which obviously it's a huge passion and cause of mine, which I'm constantly fighting and trying to introduce legislation in 2022 in North Carolina on this very issue.
Yeah.
But a lot of this adaptive exercise equipment that we need, these smaller companies, from a cost benefit perspective, it's not worth it for them to go for these medical codes and CPT codes, and go through the hoops with the FDA, because it's just an endless process for them as well. So it's like a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
In the States.
Yeah. That was my whole platform, is standing devices and like functional electrical stem and all of those, because after 34 years of being paralyzed, I still don't have a wound or fracture or contracture ever. And it's because I never listened to them when they said it wasn't medically necessary. I was like, coming from a person who isn't paralyzed, like, I'm not taking your advice. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like, I know what my body needs.
And these, with the rise of diversity, equity, inclusion divisions and fields within major corporations right now, they say they're walking the walk. They're walking the walk. They're just beginning. They're in the baby stages, but they need people who have real disabilities from the top down to actually pave and lead the way. And that's what I'm trying to get into. But it's a really challenging field. I mean, they don't want us, right? Because we're going to provide valid arguments for them to,
have to cover.
Every denial for them, the longer they wait, the more money is in their pockets. And, it's really interesting. There's an article that Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Florida got labeled for 7 years in a row one of the top disability inclusion friendly companies to work for. And I was just flabbergasted when I read that article. I'm like, really? Well, I mean, and I posted this on LinkedIn, and I said, but they need to take a deeper look, because are they being really, disability friendly and inclusive?
Yeah. Oh, I'd like to know more about that and how
it's on my LinkedIn. You can check it out. I was shocked when I read the article.
I will check it out.
I was diplomatic on LinkedIn on how I expressed my feelings.
Oh, well, I'm totally checking that out. Yeah. Cause I mean, Disability In is an organization that New Motion has partnered with. Yeah.
I know them well.
And I love them. I mean, and I feel like they've, there's the Disability Equality Index that we went through the whole, and in every area of the company, there was improvement that can be made. But regardless of the score, there's still so much lacking in each area. So to me, those are just tools put in place to make you better every year, but there's always places where room for improvement.
I won't give you the name, but I was interviewed at a company that got a higher score with Disability In, and they interviewed, and they as many companies, they opened up a diversity, equity, inclusion field office, but it's still only like 5 or 6 people, and they're getting all this news publicity, and I was thinking to myself, it's all about the publicity, but when is real corporate culture going to change? And that is going to take many of us standing up and trying to get into that world. But we need that opportunity and that chance, because I think even having a disability, let alone your professional background, I mean, you have to be organized, you have to be meticulous, you have to do your own homework and research on the average person. And that offers an incredible amount of skill set to a company that, just simply living with a disability for decades offers a company.
I agree. The persistence that it takes, and the creativity, and the coming up with new solutions, thinking outside the box that we have to do moment, hour by hour, moment by moment, sometimes figuring out a
absolutely.
solution. Yeah. Okay. So I have one question that kind of goes back to something you said earlier. I'm curious about when you went to China for the surgery and the rehab, why you chose that and yeah, how you figured that out.
Well, my dad is a brilliant man. He might as well be a scientist, but he's one of those guys that you can listen to for hours. And you know the expression, you know a little bit about a lot. He knows a lot about a lot.
That's cool.
It's lovely and annoying all at the same time. But he traveled the world and he joined on with a group of Swedish scientists and he tagged along and he went over to Kunming, China, which is about 2 hours north of Hong Kong. And there is a program that Wise Young, at Rutgers
Mhm.
University,
Yeah.
he was creating at a private hospital, Tongren Hospital, for a walking program for 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, stating that, walking on your own, not on a locomat or so forth, will promote more neuroplasticity, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera. And they also, they had some top surgeons from the People's Liberation Army who were doing all of these spinal decompression surgeries very quickly, like within 4 to 5 hours. And a lot of neurosurgeons are afraid to touch you in the United States, open up your actual spinal cord, right?
Yeah.
Because when you break your neck, it's generally not always a neurosurgeon, it's an orthopedic surgeon who's just putting back the bones together because they're not actually opening up the actual dura and the pia mater, the nuts
Right.
and bolts of the nerve bundles. And so I went over there for the spinal surgery because I had a giant cyst in my spinal cord that was killing me and I was losing respiratory function.
Wow.
And the surgery, it was great. It saved my life. It was a disaster and left me with a lot more neck pain at the same time. And then the rehab program, while advertised beautifully, was executed poorly due to the fact that physical therapy, still such a new field. A lot of the physical therapists, young, not remotely trained in spinal cord injury. They broke my leg in multiple places. I was in bed for months and months with which got out of spinal surgery and broken legs. But with cultural sensitivities, they didn't want to admit that they broke the foreigner's leg, the blonde foreigner, like their prize little star patient.
Wow.
So I sat there, like now my right leg, I call her Gumby because she hyperextends the wrong way. So I can't stand anymore due to that and the severe osteoporosis I had, which is what caused the break. So, it was an interesting experience. I mean, I speak the language, which is fortunate.
Amazing.
So I have my caregivers. I spoke with Chinese, had to learn neurosurgery in Chinese and so forth. So I spent 3 years there working and trading and reading. I think I read 170 books in 1 year. I just had a lot of time. I got into like astrophysics and particle. I mean,
Wow,
I had a
Allie.
lot of time. And then I would spend the morning at the rehab and the gym. So it was an interesting experience. I would say it was successful in that I'm not dead. But it was a failure in that I came home more beat up than I went when I
Wow.
went there. So, the dichotomy of life and decisions.
Right. That is really interesting. First of all, because we've talked several times about different things, but I've learned so much more about you in this podcast, and I'm more fascinated than ever about your upbringing and gosh, just how darn smart you are. That's crazy.
I'm just curious. I wouldn't say I'm smart. I'm just curious. When I want to learn something, I
Yeah.
keep reading and taking notes. And I adapted as a C6 with, paralyzed. I call these my little paws. Paralyzed paws. I have a big giant keyboard that's like for an 80-year-old. I can't see, so I type upside down with my knuckles and voice dictation. And yeah, and so I have a giant mouse, so I can work just as quickly and efficiently. The only challenge is my mind can go for 16 hours, but my body with the nerve pain.
Yeah.
Some days I can get 5 or 6 or 7 hours physically in my wheelchair. Some days 12 hours, and I can work from bed.
Right.
Cause I get a lot of neck pain. It's just I don't work in a standard format that the average person does. So
no, you're a superwoman. And I say this all the time. I do feel like, when your body doesn't physically do everything that you want it to do, yeah, we have to use our minds more than the average person for a lot of different things. But and then I also think that we have the tendency or many of us, to attempt to overachieve to compensate. I feel like we work circles around people most of the time.
No. I feel like a lot of us can get done in 6 hours what most people get done in 12.
Yeah.
It's definitely an overcompensation. I wouldn't say it's always a positive. Honestly, I get that a lot, but I push myself to limits that probably aren't always as healthy. But if I can help somebody, even if it like brings me to my knees at the end of the day, I'm going to do that because that's just my nature,
Yeah.
right? I mean, what's the alternative? Sitting around the
Yeah.
house and looking at
That's
the
what,
wall and
that's what I always said. They're like, oh
yeah,
my gosh, you're so amazing. I'm like, what exactly was I going to do at 19 years old? Sit around and cry about it? Like,
yeah.
no, that's not my
You have two
style.
choices in life. You can be miserable, or I don't like the word happy because I
Right.
think the happier try to be, the more miserable you are because it's
Yeah.
this false notion from movies over the last couple
Yeah.
decades. But I say happy enough,
Yeah.
right? Because we
Yeah.
all have our like adversities and our struggles. So it's finding these little moments, but nobody's ever happy all the time. There's
Yeah.
too many
There's
happy
a
endings.
balance to that. Cause like I have a generally happy nature. Things
You
get
do.
difficult though. They do. And yeah, probably not one to cut myself a whole lot of slack. I don't think you are either. But I will say this about both of us. I think that we work hard, but we also play hard because I think just watching your social media, I think we both know how to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, even on a typical week. So my husband and I do a couple trips a year. They're obviously adapted trips. They're not what I would. I mean, I would love to do crazier things, but
Yeah.
my so every quadriplegic or anybody who is disabled, paraplegic, quadriplegic, some people get really bad urinary tract infections. Some people have pressure sores. I'm Princess and the Pea. You look at me and I get a red mark on my skin. It's very frustrating. So therefore, I am not going water skiing because I'm going to brown some around on my butt. When I went surfing last weekend, I was very tenacious when I was like, do not sit me on my butt, roll me on my belly. I don't care if you cut the front side of me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But with just that work-life balance. So, during the weekdays, people say, wow, you live this crazy life. I'm like, well, 6 days a week, I'm actually right here at my computer
Yeah.
doing what I do. And then on Saturdays, I have a strict out of the house policy at like 1 p.m. And then I said, anything goes. We don't have to plan it. We can go dancing. We can go to a park. We can go to a drag show. I don't care what it is. It
It
can be a
has to be
concert. It
out.
has to be weird and wacky, and we need to do something for the story to remember this weekend.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, it makes me, yeah, I can't wait to meet you in person because our whole relationship has developed during
I
COVID, but
know.
I mean, and I don't know what's going to happen with all this Delta variant, but, eventually we will meet in person. Thank you so much for joining me today. I feel like I know we could talk for hours, on a
Yes.
multitude of different subjects. So promise me you'll come back.
I promise I will come back and I will talk about sex and orgasms.
Oh
I
my
swear.
God.
Scout's
My
honor.
favorite.
Yes, mine too.
Oh my gosh, Allie, thank you so much for being on, and I will see you again hopefully really soon.
Thanks, Karen. It was great to be here.
All
Have
right,
a good
bye.
one.